My name is Charlene Margot, and I am the co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture, the organization that brings you this series, the Parent Education Series, now in its 16th year. We are beyond delighted to be offering you tonight's program with Vanessa Kellam from Health Connected, Consent Reframed, Beyond the Affirmative Yes. As Vanessa will tell you, this is actually a program that we've been talking about for several years, so we are so glad to be here with you virtually tonight. We've had a tremendous response to this program, close to 250 registered. So again, congratulations to all of you for being engaged parents and being willing to engage with us on this important topic. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Sequoia High School Education Foundation, Sequoia Union High School District, Sequoia Healthcare District, Peninsula Healthcare District, and the San Mateo Union High School District, in collaboration with this organization, the Parent Venture. And as I mentioned, special thanks tonight to our featured presenter, Vanessa Kellam, who's the Family Engagement Manager at Health Connected. But before I tell you a little bit about Vanessa, just briefly, those of you who are familiar with the webinar format, tonight there are two ways for you, the audience, to engage with us. First of all, there's the chat button. So my partner, Bev Hartman, will be putting resource links and information in the chat. So do check that out. You can write notes to us as well as to one another. So again, resources, contact, reach out to each other in chat. But then for questions, we ask that you put them in the Q&A button. So again, this is a webinar format. It has the Q&A button, so please do put your questions in there. We are open to all kinds of questions tonight and look forward to hearing from you. Vanessa will be speaking for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up again to you, the audience, for about 15 minutes of Q&A. At the very end, Bev will put in a survey to a link to a very short survey. It's about 4 questions. We really hope you will take 1 minute to fill that out. It helps us both with our funding and planning for future parent education events. Tonight's program is being recorded and will be available soon on our video library. This library is on YouTube and has become a really popular and trusted resource with more than 38,000 views. So again, we hope that you will enjoy tonight's program. And when the video is ready, please do share it with your partner, your kids, or anyone else who may be interested. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Vanessa Kellam. Vanessa's complete lack of sex education during elementary and middle school prepared her to be an extremely attentive student during the 9th grade human reproduction course in home economics. That class was the spark that led Vanessa to earn a bachelor's of education majoring in health and human development. After teaching science and health in secondary schools for 10 years, Vanessa specialized in sexual health with Family Life Victoria, a leading not-for-profit organization in Melbourne, Australia. Sexual health and relationships education is the thread that weaves through her career as a sexual health educator, author, presenter, and mother. Vanessa is currently the Family Engagement Manager for nonprofit Health Connected. She writes and facilitates workshops and seminars to help parents and families better understand sexual health and relationships. Please join me, everyone, in a really warm virtual welcome for our friend Vanessa Kellam. Take it away, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Charlene. It's my pleasure to be here this evening and share this talk with you all. It is a joy to finally do this with Charlene. I know it's been on her mind for some time. And so consent is a really important part of our work in schools, because Health Connected is the organisation that I work for, and we go into middle schools and high schools and elementary schools and talk about sexual health and safety and relationships and all this good stuff. So some of the things that I'll be sharing with you, hopefully, will have been shared with many of your young people, because in this particular region, Health Connected is really active in local high schools. So hopefully you will find some common ground with your young people, and you'll be able to sort of springboard off this particular talk so that you can engage your young people, because actually that's what it's all about. So, Consent Reframed, Beyond the Affirmative Yes. I know for a fact that many young people know the word consent, and they know that it means permission or agreement to do something, or an affirmative yes, particularly in California. However, the reframed part and the beyond the affirmative yes comes into play because many young people stop there. They don't know actually how to employ it, like how to use the principles of consent. So we're going beyond the affirmative yes, and we're taking it into the realm of conversation and making it real for young people, particularly in romantic relationships, particularly in sexual relationships. That's going to be our focus tonight. So we're moving from sort of the general consent into sexual consent, because I know many of you are sitting there going, oh, Vanessa, my young person has no interest in relationships or romance or sex. So, couldn't we just be a bit more general? However, what we want to do is provide this information so that you can provide it to your young people in a sort of protective sense, right? Because we don't know. Like this, I love this photo. I said to Charlene, oh, I love that photo that we're using for the title slide, because I can imagine as it gets darker, as these young people are sort of maybe, looking at each other, finding out who their crush is, and maybe wandering off further into the garden, that's when these conversations become really important. So thanks for joining me on this journey. All right, I'm going to launch a poll now, because I'm really curious to know where people are at in terms of why they're here. Actually, now I've just got to move my control panel. Oh, guess what? I'll move my polls. So I'd love to know why people are here. Because I think, and you'll see this poll coming up on your screen in just a moment, but it will give us a nice sort of baseline to start from. So as soon as you see this poll come up, please go ahead and answer it. I'm going to read it out so that people who speak Spanish might like to put in their answers as well. So the question is, what statement best explains your motivation for attending Consent Reframed, or this talk? The first answer is, I don't really know much about consent, and I don't think my child does either. The second is, I'm concerned my child wouldn't know what to say or do if put in a certain situation that required sexual consent. The next one is, I need to inform myself so that I can better engage my teen in a conversation about consent. And the last one is, I like hanging out with Charlene on Thursday nights. And it's multiple choice. So, it might be one or it might be several. So go ahead, and we will end the polling in just a few seconds. So get in there if you are keen. I love as much interaction as we can. I know we're online, but there'll be just a couple of opportunities for you to engage with us so that we get to know your thoughts. All right, so I'm going to end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then I'm going to share the results with you. So most of us are here because you realize that, hey, look, if I'm informed as the trusted adult, as the parent, as the guardian, then I can actually start to have some of these conversations, but maybe I just don't quite know where to launch from. And so this is what we were anticipating too. But of course, if you're here because you're like, actually, I hear the word consent, but I really don't know how it actually works out in life, great, you are in the right place. In fact, all of you are in the right place, particularly people who like hanging out with Charlene on a Thursday night. So I'm going to stop sharing now. You might just need to press the cross so you don't have that in your face all the time. Alrighty, so it seems appropriate that we start with a definition of legal consent. We share this particular slide with people in Teen Talk Middle School and High School. And it's very general, as you'll see, but I'm going to use examples that talk about sexual consent just to get us started. So legal consent, particularly in California, is that affirmative yes. And what that means is that it is an enthusiastic, active yes. So if somebody is in a sexual situation and they go, oh, I don't know, or I'm not quite sure, or they don't say anything at all, that is not consent. That is not legal consent. It needs to be an active, enthusiastic yes. It's also based on equal power to be legal consent. So this is where the whole Me Too movement came in, because we had people of significant status and power requiring people who were dependent on them for career and all of that. So that's where that came in. Any employer who asks, say, an employee for any sort of sexual behavior is way out of line. They actually can't give legal consent because of that power imbalance. Same with age. If there's too many years in between, same deal. It can't be legal consent because one person is too much older than the younger one. It's also a choice without pressure. So people can't be tricked or coerced or nagged to death, you know, or threatened. And it's a process, which means that consent can be given initially. Say we're talking in a sexual context, you know, initially a person's really into it and there's that enthusiastic participation, that enthusiastic yes. And then at some point they renege and they say, well, it's not even renege, they decide to revoke that consent. They don't want to do that anymore. That's okay, because it needs to take place all the way through a sexual encounter. And in fact, every time something escalates in behavior, there needs to be consent there too. So it seems like a very, oh yeah, it's an affirmative yes. It's way beyond the affirmative yes. So that's our definition that we'll be working with this evening. Now, I don't know whether you've seen this video, but it's the perfect place for us to start. And if you've not shared this with your young person, this is the perfect sort of launching place to begin talking about consent. So I'm going to share this video now. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll come and join you right at the end. Okay, off we go.
Vanessa, does the video have sound?
Oh. Okay. No sound. All right. Well, this will save us some time. So in that case, I will not share this video, but I'm going to go back to the title slide so you can see what it's called, because it's awesome. Consent, it's as simple as tea. And many of you probably have seen this video. And it's really about making the very thought of unconsensual sex ludicrous. And that's why it's compared to a cup of tea. So the message is really powerful. It's about asking for consent, and all of those 4 elements come out in the video. It's about asking for that consent, but it's done in a way that is like the delivery is genius. So look out for that video. It's not essential to our talk tonight, but it is a fun one. And with that powerful message, nobody will feel judged. So share that with your young person, and you'll be able to sort of, you know, just launch off that. Okay. Well, There we go. Alrighty, so next slide. Oh, there we are. So now we're going to talk about some of those foundations that before having a conversation with your young person about consent have to be reasonably in place so that they can employ the principles of consent. Because it really does go, you'll see it does go beyond just saying yes or no or asking for permission. So firstly, in terms of the foundations, our young people need bodily autonomy. And what that means is they feel in control of their own body. They have agency. And so if they have that, then it makes total sense that they would require permission from somebody else and that another person would require permission from them. If they don't have that sense of autonomy, if they don't have that sense of agency, then consent is going to be somewhat fuzzy. And we want to take all the fuzz away and we want it to be a really clear, concise, intentional discussion for them. The other thing too is some young people have that natural sense of empathy and other young people struggle with wondering how another person feels about something. So you'll know your own young person. You'll know that whether that's a sort of an area of growth for them or whether they've got it down. But empathy will really help the person, particularly who's asking for consent, because they don't make those assumptions, well, I'm into it, I'm sexually excited, so therefore my partner must be as well. Or, oh, I'm having this wonderful sexual experience, now I'd like to sort of upgrade it to anal sex, and I'm not going to ask because they should want it as well. Those sorts of things happen in relationships because of a lack of empathy and entitlement. So you might need to maybe have some of those sort of more empathetic discussions and sort of veer your young person to wonder about how other people feel in certain situations. Now, I learned about GIST in this particular way in another workshop that Charlene ran a couple of years ago, and Jess Shatkin was the speaker, and he was talking about risk mitigation, I suppose, for young people. And he was saying that young people, if they don't have a sense of automatic internalized understanding when it comes to decision making, they sort of get discombobulated when they're thrown into particular situations. So what we want our young people to know is their sense of values. So particularly sexual values, sexual ethics, what's okay with them according to their value system. Because if we can sort of get that down, then young people will have a much easier time with GIST, with making that decision very clearly and easily. They won't have to deliberate for a really long time. And I'm going to talk about this some more. The skills, asking, giving and receiving the response, we'll talk about also a little bit later. But those skills, we need to practice them in a general area in our families. So asking for consent when we're just interacting with one another, because of course in a sexual situation or a romantic situation, things become just so much more nuanced and so much more complicated. So we do need to practice on a general level in family and in community so that your young person can take those skills and translate them into intimate relationships. And finally, language. Often we're so polite with our language that we find we can't talk about sexual consent because we can't use language like oral sex or anal sex or vaginal sex or sexual touching or sexually transmitted infections or some of those, some of that sexual health jargon. we're so about the language that it actually sort of reduces the conversation. So what we want to do is have a foundation of openness and honesty and comfort with the language, so then we can move on and have really valuable conversations. All right, any questions? Pop them in the Q&A so we can answer those at the end. But they're the foundations, well beyond the affirmative yes, right? Okay. So some of this content that I'm going to read you a story. I don't know how long it's been since you've had a story read to you, but I'm going to read you a story. It's Zoe's and Leo's story. But the content sometimes is unsettling for people, particularly if they've had sexual trauma in their past. So I just want to give people a bit of a heads up. So maybe do what you can to manage your emotions if that's you, or maybe sort of sit this one out, just turn off your sound maybe, or just go for a little walk and come back. It won't be too long. Okay, so this is the story from Zoe's perspective, and this is a very, very common story. It's not an unusual sort of story for people to have had this happen to. All right, so this is Zoe's. When my cousin called me with an offer to tutor his friend Leo, oh, that's cut off. I can't see because of my photos. I was excited since I needed the extra cash. We met once a week over lunch and I got to know Leo pretty well. We felt really comfortable with each other and even felt a little chemistry between us. Last month, my cousin invited me to a movie and Leo was there too. We sat together in the theatre and he walked me out afterwards. I ended up giving Leo a kiss, which was great. I knew I was crossing the line, being his tutor and all, but it felt right. A few nights ago, Leo called me for an emergency study session before finals. He came over and I was really excited to see him. He only had a few questions to go over, so we finished reviewing quickly. I suggested we watch a movie and he said, sure. So we went to the couch and got comfortable. We started to get closer and snuggle, then started making out. I was into it and I knew he was too, so I reached for his zipper. But he pushed my hands away and said, don't. I didn't understand what his problem was. I assumed he was just nervous, but I wondered why. We'd been flirting for a while and he didn't seem to need that much help today. Obviously, we were going to hook up. He told me to stop, but he was hard, so I kept going and I went down on him. He was quiet, but he didn't try to stop me again, so I'm sure he liked it. Afterwards, we just sat there awkwardly. He said, it's late, and started to gather his stuff. I wished him luck on the test, and he left. Okay, so this is Leo's story. Same situation, but from a different point of view. All right. Finals were coming and I needed to get my grades up. My friend introduced me to their cousin, Zoe, who's a tutor. I called her and we met up. She was super cool and cute. We continued meeting once a week and my grades started to improve. I really felt comfortable with her. We eventually started talking about personal things that I haven't even told my best friends. One Friday, my friend invited me to the movies, and guess who was there too? Zoe. At the end of the night, I walked Zoe to her car. When I leaned in to hug her goodbye, she kissed me. I was surprised, but I liked it. The night before my first final, I was freaking out. I called Zoe for an emergency study session, and she said to come by her house. She helped me review, and I felt a lot better. Then she asked if I wanted to watch a movie to relax. I said, sure, and we grabbed some snacks and sat on her couch. She got closer and started snuggling against me. Her lips were pretty, and it reminded me of our kiss. I felt a connection, so I leaned in and kissed her. Things started to move quicker. She started rubbing my thighs and reached for my zipper. But something told me this was going too far. I pushed her hands away and said, "Don't." She looked at me, unconvinced, and kept going. I said, "No, really, we've got to stop." She looked down at my erection and said, "But it looks like you want it." I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to hurt her feelings by rejecting her or risk telling others the private things that she knows about me. But I didn't say yes. She kept going and put her mouth on my penis. When it was over, she sat next to me and said, "I'm glad you came over." I just sat in disbelief. We had chemistry, but I didn't think coming over would lead to this. I just got my stuff and left. Okay, so that is the story. And I'm going to now ask you to do a poll about the story. So I'm going to launch this poll, and there are just some questions really that will help just sort of engage your critical thinking about this story, because it's a very common story. And I want you to sort of think about those elements of consent that we talked about, some of that foundational stuff. And as soon as you see the poll, you can start answering. It'll come up really soon. So I'm going to read out the questions too, so that some people who might be in the Spanish channel will be able to either contribute or just have a sort of a wonder to themselves privately. So the first question is, according to the definition of consent, which elements are breached in this story? And these are all multi-choice. Why did Zoe think that Leo was into it? What made Zoe think that Leo was into it? Oh, sorry, I didn't read through. So the second one, they had chemistry. Leo had an erection. Leo asked Zoe for oral sex. Number 3, why did Leo comply? He didn't want to offend Zoe. He was afraid that Zoe might tell other people private information. He wanted to have oral sex. It was part of a fight, flight, or freeze reflex. And then the last question, whose fault is it? Is it Leo's or Zoe's? All right. Go ahead if you want to be participating in the poll, feel free. We'll end in just a few seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'll share the results. Okay, so according to the definition, which had those 4 elements of consent, which elements are breached in a story? So that first one was that affirmative yes. Leo didn't say yes to that. In fact, he said he wanted to stop. The power, you're all right as well, because she was the tutor and he was the student, and he'd told her secret stuff, which gives her more power as well. Pressure, it's sort of related, right? She pressured him physically. She didn't stop. She didn't wait. She didn't talk. She just kept going. And it is a process. That process was breached as well, because even though Leo was up for the kissing, he wasn't up for the oral sex. And Zoe thought because he was into one thing, then he was into another, and that's not true. So why did Zoe think that Leo was into it? Well, they did have chemistry. Leo did not tell her that he was into it. Nobody thought that. Leo had an erection. And this is often, and this is what we need to make sure that our young male-bodied people know, is that just because someone has an erection does not mean that they're into it. It does not, that does not constitute an affirmative yes. It's one of those things that the body responds to arousal in all different ways. Sometimes someone could be doing their 7 times tables and actually have an erection. It's not one of those things that only happens with wanted sexual behavior. Sometimes neurologically, it happens because of physical stimulation that Zoe at this time was providing. And even though he wasn't psychologically into it or even necessarily physically into it, the neurological connections caused an erection to happen. And we need to let our young men know this so that they don't feel as though, oh, I was complicit. Even though my head wasn't complicit, my body was, so therefore it's my fault. No, that's not how it is. Why did Leo comply? Well, he didn't want to offend Zoe. This is a big piece. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. He was also afraid that Zoe would reveal secrets about him that he'd told her to his friends and other people. So there's that sense of socially, I'm going to be in big trouble potentially if I deny her. And then what we also need to tell our young people is that when we are overwhelmed in a circumstance, and we call this hot cognition, you know, there's cold cognition when you're all chill and you're thoughtful and you're calm. Hot cognition is when you are in the situation and you're overwhelmed with stimuli coming from all different points of view. So when that happens, some people will fight. Like some people might have pushed Zoe away. Some people might, it's flight. They might have just got up and left without a word. And for some people, they freeze. They don't know what to do. It's like being in shock. They're just like, and so we need to let our young people know that if that's them, if they've frozen, they're not complicit. Again, young people think that it's their fault by not acting, and that's just sometimes how it is with the fight, flight, or freeze reflex. I'm going to stop sharing and cross that poll off because it will be in your way like it is in mine. And that story is just really important for us because it gives us an insight into two people's points of view in a very, very common scenario. If it's not a tutor situation, it can be, you know, it can be transferable in all sorts of other ways. So then if consent is so complex, Vanessa, if there's 4 elements to it and, you know, relationships are tricky and they're messy and Leo and Zoe are in this sort of typical situation that seems really nuanced and uncomfortable, what's the solution? We need to first acknowledge the need for belonging and connection that young people feel down deep in their soul. What they definitely want is to be a part of a group of friends, part of a wider group. They want to feel like they fit in. And for a young person, being embarrassed or ostracized or rejected is like their biggest threat. It's dangerous to them. And so we need to recognize that, because sometimes we just say no, just say go away. And we give these really flippant responses, but we don't realize how important it is for them to maintain relationship so they can maintain their belonging in the group. And it's super important. We can't underestimate it. So the other solution, so we acknowledge that. And then the best solution here is for them to be able to articulate consent with authority and clarity. And in order to do that, they have to have a really simple strategy so that it becomes just, so that it becomes automatic. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to wonder and process too much. So, did I skip the problem? I think I skipped the problem. So the problem is that they sort of conflate refusal with rejection, like Leo did. You know, I'm just going backwards one slide. They think, oh, if I refuse because I'm not into it, I'm going to reject Zoe, and Zoe is going to be just crushed, or Zoe's going to be mad, and they're just going to share my secrets. So they conflate those two things with refusal and rejection, one and the same. We need to let them separate that out, tease it out a bit. Despite knowing consent, they value connection, like I was saying, and belonging above their own comfort, above their own right to consent, above their own safety sometimes. And they're not comfortable in articulating consent in a way that preserves relationships. They're just not comfortable with it because of that conflation with those two things. That's the solution. And the potential, if we do it right, is that there's no confusion and they reduce the blurred boundaries. There's always going to be blurred boundaries in sexual relationships. There's always going to be, because when people get carried away by those endorphins and by the dopamine that a sexual experience brings, then it's going to be blurred. It's how we are as humans, sort of one behavior, you know, so the sexual touching above the clothes just sort of goes into sexual touching underneath the clothes, and sexual touching on the top of the body then sort of progresses down the bottom of the body, and it starts, you know, with the genitals, and then once the genitals are, you know, and it just tends to roll in. So this is where our language needs to really come to the fore as well. We need to be able to articulate that with young people, because if we just say romantic behavior, then that's not specific enough for them. We have to get pretty specific. So the other thing that we want them to be able to do is articulate that consent and refusal in a way that doesn't sort of pull people apart, but that honors both participants in the relationship. Now, obviously, if someone is having their safety, you know, if someone's safety is at risk, that's a different story altogether. We don't need to preserve the relationship. We're talking about consent as it most often is needed when people are in relationship with one another and when they want to stay in relationship with one another, whether it be friendships or romantic relationships. So now we're going to have a little bit of a high school teen talk, middle school moment, because these are the strategies that we share with our young people. Because there is a problem, there's that disconnect. Then there is a solution, which are these strategies, because what we want is gist. What we want is just this automatic response, and it needs to be easy. So we call this our Be Firm strategy. And so firm in our resolution, you know, firm in our refusal, not nasty, just firm. And so this is important to us. So I'm going to explain this strategy so that you can explain it to your young people. First, in the Be Firm model, we need to figure out our own boundaries. So remember those foundations, how we talked about values. We need to actually have values conversations with our young people about their own values, family values, faith values, sexual values, all of those things, because that is going to inform their body boundaries. That's really important. They have a clear sense of what's okay with them and what's not okay with them, and why it's okay and why it's not okay. So that's the figure out your boundaries. Then they need to inform their partner. And I'll give you an example in just a moment, but they need to inform their partner. Say their partner says, oh, you know, we've been together 3 days and I think it's time that we had sex. Then the person, they know their boundaries and they're thinking, that's just not okay with me. We've only known each other for 3 days. Then we need to inform the partner. I don't think that's going to happen, or that's not okay with me, or no, now's not the right time. and the reason why. So we're wanting to preserve relationships, and providing a reason helps with that. It's just not a nah, get lost type of situation. It's this is my thought out reason. And so the reason can be anything like, we've only been together 3 days. I think that's a pretty big step given that this is so early in the relationship. Or it might be, oh, I don't really know much about the safety precautions if I'm going to have sex with someone. I'm just not prepared for that. Or, oh, actually, it doesn't fit in with my value system. Like I'm not going to have sex until I'm like full on in love or married or whatever their value system, is informing them. But this is where the intact piece that really keeps people connected comes into play. The make a suggestion. So I've figured out my values for myself. I've informed my partner. I've given them a reason why, which is really respectful and also shows that I've thought about it. It's just not just some whim. And now I'm going to make a suggestion so that we can still connect. But you know how much I love kissing you. We can definitely keep kissing. Or you know how we were just touching above the clothes? Perhaps we can touch underneath the clothes. And so they give a suggestion that still maintains the connection between the two people. And it's a positive sort of projection as opposed to just, nah, you're dreaming. So that's be firm. Now we're going to practice this. So this is a different story, much shorter this time. You and your partner have been together for a few months now, and things have started to get more intimate. You're curious about doing a couple of things, but you're not ready for sex. Your partner mentions that they are interested in having sex. So we ask the students, use the be firm model to talk to them about why you're not ready for sex. So when we introduce this to high school students, this is a high school scenario. When we introduce this, the high school students are like, I don't know. I don't know how you would have that conversation. Oh, it's such an unromantic conversation, they say. Oh, I don't know where to start. Oh, wouldn't they just feel like they were going to be rejected? All those things come out in the classroom. They're petrified at having these conversations. But when we give them examples, this is how a conversation could look. They're like, oh, it's actually really sort of like simplified. It's not complex. And we're like, exactly. You just have to know what your boundaries are to begin with. And then it becomes easier and it's short. And they're like, oh, I thought I had to have like this really long, boring conversation. No, it's just really short. So it could look like this. Hey, I wanted to talk with you some more about my boundaries. I'm down to fool around with you, but I don't think I'm ready for sex. I'm just not ready for all the responsibility that comes along with that decision. Can we just take it slow and stick to making out for now? That's it. And they're always surprised it's so short. But that's what we want our young people to be thinking about, is that it's short and it's snappy. It doesn't have to be long and legal and drawn out. So that's just an example using the be firm model. And I'll make sure that, well, you'll have the slides anyway on the video, so you can get back to that. But firm, F-I-R-M. So in the chat, I would like you to think about that story that we just read and the 4 major differences between this little story, so this is a really short one, and the story about Zoe and Leo. And if you can, articulate that in the chat. And I know that it's a challenge and we won't spend too long, but I'd love to hear from you whether you can sort of decipher the differences, the major differences. There's a lot of differences, obviously, but the major differences between that short little scenario and Zoe and Leo's story. So what are those 4 differences? You can put in more if you like. And how do they impact the consent conversation? So I'm going to follow the chat. You can put that in now. You can tick the little thing. I'm going to, yep. Okay, go ahead, just in the chat function. Great. Nobody's coming in the chat. Am I missing something? I must be.
Yeah, one comment from a parent in chat.
Okay, great. Here I am. Yep. Great. So clear communication, honest values. Here we go. Yes. It sometimes just takes a while to sink in, right? Suggestions of what is agreeable, discussion, talked about it before it happened. Bah, bah, bah. Consent, yes. Clarification first of boundaries. Yes, someone in Spanish is saying, let me see, I'm just my very bad Spanish, which is non-existent. There's a history there. They've talked about it. Clear boundaries. Yes. Excellent. Any more? Power dynamic and pressure. Exactly. So that we're making the assumption these young people are pretty similar ages. So there's not that same amount of pressure. Fantastic. Great. Yeah, there's no power dynamic. Exactly. Exactly. Yep. Excellent. So well done. The differences in those stories are immense, and you've picked out those major differences. You know, the fact that the behavior was in, or rather the discussion was in cold cognition, you know, whereas, yeah, there's no fighting, freezing to need, because they're already in this calm disposition in order to have that conversation. The emotion doesn't take over. Exactly. Can you imagine the emotion going through poor Leo on that couch in the midst of the situation without any warning? It's like overwhelming. And in this situation, it's calm and it's talked about. There's no behavior. So it's far more able to be hashed out. Thank you. Yes, and so what we're wanting for our young people is this clear sense of what they want and this importance of establishing boundaries. So it's very important to establish those boundaries early in a relationship. And we also always say, if young people can't talk about sex, they can't talk about, and sex means different things to people, right? So for some people, sex is vaginal sex. For some people who have watched a lot of pornography, sex is anal sex. It really is. It's anal sex. That's what they think sex is. For some people is, and of course, you know, if someone's in a gay relationship, then that could well be what they expect as well. For some people, sex does not include oral sex. They think that's not real. And so the assumption that people are going to be into oral sex quickly is a common assumption, because they think it's not real sex. It's safe. And we want to make sure in the classroom particularly, but you can make sure that your young people know that oral sex can transmit sexually transmitted infections. So it's important that if they do decide to engage in oral sex, that they do still use condoms. It's important, or a dental dam, which can cover the vulva. Some people say that, you know, sexual touching isn't sex, but also sexual touching can transmit sexually transmitted infections. So it's really, really important that we can use the language. Missing in both, highlighting that start thinking first keeps emotion from overtaking the situation. Absolutely. Communication, so important. You can tell your kids, if you can't talk about something, then you shouldn't be doing it, because it requires so much interaction with one another. Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for contributing to that. That's super, super helpful. And I'm glad that you were able to see those differences as well. We don't want anyone close to us having Leo's experience. Leo was raped. He was raped. By law, he was raped. Zoe would be liable. It was Zoe's fault, according to the law. And so we might say, oh, but Leo didn't get up and leave, or, oh, but Leo could have been stronger. We've just gone through the reasons why Leo wasn't in that position to do those things. It was not Leo's fault. It was Zoe. She would be the one who would be charged if Leo decided to go down that path. So we don't want our loved ones in these situations. Thank you, everybody, for your comments in the chat. I'm super, super, impressed with all of those thoughtful talks. Hi, Charlene. Did I miss anything?
No, I'm okay. just joining you, waiting.
Okay, because I'm on my last slide. It's the time. So if people are rejected, then they're going to need to be able to manage that rejection. So we need to tell them that they need to affirm themselves if this happens to them, which it will, because hello. They need to accept the person's decision. They need to feel their feelings because it does hurt. They do need to increase self-care, maybe talk to someone. They do need to reframe and say, well, actually, the fact that we've had this conversation means that our relationship is going to grow and it's healthier for that, and then move forward. So we'll make sure these slides are available if you just need a reminder, but it's good for the rejected person to know this strategy also. I'm going to leave that there just for a little bit while we have a chat. All right. I've just got some action items for everyone. Show that video. It's super fun. Practice using more direct language. Wonder about values together. Evaluate those foundational items and begin correction if necessary. And use this talk as a springboard. So like use me, oh, I went to this talk and we had these discussions. So with that, let's get on to Q&A. Let's see what we've got. Why is the word expectation still used when experience is told always that it is straight connected to disappointment? Oh, right. Yes. Expectation. You mean the gap between expectation and reality. Is that what you mean? And that gap then leads to disappointment. We all have expectations though, don't we, in reality? So yes, there are going to be expectations of ourselves, of others in relationships. And yes, expectation is definitely connected to disappointment.
So Vanessa, let me ask you, I'm happy to sort of funnel through the questions just because we have a few minutes together. So that's my job, to help you. Okay?
Nice. I'd love that. I'd love that, Charlene.
All right. I have to be of some use tonight. Here's a question that is a really good one, Vanessa, and kudos to whatever dad this is. If a father is raising a family of 2 girls, 10 and 13, because mom has died, how can you suggest he who is uncomfortable with the topic can approach his girls without feeling creepy?
Yeah, I know. I can sort of empathize with that. Look, I think you start by having it's almost like a disclaimer at the beginning of the conversation. this is a really important conversation that I want to have with you. But I do recognize that sometimes, being an adult, you don't have to bring in gender even, being an adult talking to young people, sometimes it might feel as though I might not know what I'm talking about, or maybe I'm too old. But this conversation is so important that it's worth the embarrassment, or it's worth feeling a bit dated. So you don't have to even bring in your gender. You can sort of lean on the generational gap, because it's probably, if you say, oh, I feel creepy about that, they might not even think that it's creepy. That's our perception as an adult. So go with something a little bit more gentle rather than, than the gender being a creepy thing, because they're probably not thinking that in the first place.
So I'm assuming that means, Vanessa, that a single parent, that this doesn't need to be a same-sex talk.
No.
Girls or dad and boys.
Oh, no. In fact, the more mixed gendered conversations we can have about this, the more integrated it can become, because you're hearing it from different people's perspectives. So absolutely, yes. And in any sexual health topic, even menstruation, it's a great thing for people with male bodies to be able to understand and talk about with people with female bodies, for sure.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to also emphasize for any of you who may have joined late, first of all, thank you for being with us. You all stuck with us through this journey, and I know at times it was a little touchy. Vanessa, you do such a wonderful job. So everybody stayed with us through the whole hour, which we really appreciate. We have a couple minutes, Vanessa, but there's a few questions, and I think it's worth you addressing about how alcohol and sex kind of work together. Maybe boys and girls are partying and alcohol is involved, and at first it's okay, and then it isn't. Girl goes to school and says, I was drunk, I didn't give consent. Do you have any input on this topic? It's one we're hearing several times in the questions.
Yes, so that's where there's you remember the equal power, the power balance. So alcohol takes that away. And it is one of those things, because people are at parties, there's alcohol, and therefore your ability to process information and consent is diminished. So these are the conversations that we do need to have with young people. It's a whole talk really by itself, because it diminishes cognitive function, of course, but it also gives young people an excuse, and they often lean on the excuse of, oh, I was drunk. So what we need to do is first focus on why the risk mitigation part of it, which is only, going to a party and drinking to excess is one of those red flag type of things. So sometimes it's great for parents and trusted adults to say, when people have too much to drink, they're liable to do something embarrassing, which could be caught on someone's phone and shared amongst your peers. Now, even just that, talking about that in cold cognition, so not in any sort of heated situation, the young person thinks, oh, what's worse than being embarrassed? Almost nothing. And so they think to themselves, okay, so when I am at this party situation, I'm either not going to drink any alcohol because it sort of doesn't align with my value system, or I'm going to make a very intentional effort to stop at one. We all say to our children, don't drink at this party, right? We all say that. They're underage or what, we all say the same thing, but we still need to make sure that we're keeping real.
All right. So Vanessa, again, I just want to reconfirm, because so many people are saying thank you to you for tackling this topic in such a level-headed and warm and empathetic way. We really appreciate it. It was worth waiting 2 years to do it. So again, I really thank you. What kind of final words? You've covered so much tonight. What sort of final message would you like to leave us with?
There is a real, in an hour, I really struggled, I'm not going to lie, just to condense everything. But I think really it's about the talking. It really is about the talking. It's about comfort with language, so we can be honest and we can use terminology so we can be really specific. and we don't shy away from the conversations. So anytime we watch TV and there's a situation on the screen, we call it out to practice our language. We ask our kids questions about the scene that happened. Where was the consent there? Did you see it? I might have missed it. Ask them questions so that we can test their knowledge, but also it helps us to sort of enter into their space without lecturing. But yeah, it's all about the talking, because if we can create a demeanor that is approachable and playful and accepting, then young people are going to come to us when they have questions or need advice. If we're really stern and serious, they're going to avoid us and go somewhere else.
That is really good advice. Keeping a sense of humor and being playful really in all aspects, but especially this one, so important. So thank you, Vanessa Kellam, for everything. Attendees, educators, parents, caregivers, we just want to reconfirm that this video will be available soon on our video library. It is a free resource. A parent asked about whether this information can be shared with middle schoolers. Yes, Health Connected also does educate middle schools in our area of San Mateo County and Santa Clara counties, I believe, Vanessa.
Yep, that's true.
And you should feel free to share this video if your kid is willing to watch it with you, or they may want to watch it themselves. Either thing is just fine with us. It's intended to be a resource. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Vanessa, for trying to fit so much information into 1 hour. You did an incredible job. Kudos to you. Thank you. Take care, everybody. Stay well, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.